Hey, we're back. This time we're going to be taking a look at the new classic movie storyline OP events. This is the first one, Wrath of Khan. And first thing we're going to look at here is the resource that you get just as a participation prize for signing up and playing in the event. And we'll get right in and take a look. So this time around we have General Orders. It's 5 points. This card explains the rules for General Orders and serves as a reminder. At the start of the game, place 5 battle station tokens on this card. During the activation phase, if a ship in your fleet is within range 1 to 3 and then the firing arc front or rear of an opposing ship after the opposing ship ends its move, you may choose to immediately remove 1 battle station token from this card and place it beside your ship, even if there's already a battle station token beside that ship. Remove this card from the game when there's no battle station tokens left on the card. Basically, it's a free actions for battle station tokens. You have to meet the specific requirements for it, but it's still a really nice thing. An extra 5 battle station tokens that you can grab throughout the game for 5 points. Pretty reasonable in that respect. There's a lot of other resources out there that are more specialized and more useful overall. But definitely a nice one, especially for those races who don't have access to battle stations. If you're playing in a faction pure environment or anything like that. Definitely a nice one. Not one of the best ones we've gotten, but definitely playable and useful. So for the scenario for this event, there's unfortunately not much to show. It's a representation of the Mutara Nebula from the Wrath of Khan. And you're basically going to set up on the right hand side of the field to about here or so on the camera. It's hard to judge because the camera doesn't get the whole table. But you're going to set up on this side over here, and your opponent's going to set up on the far end. And the other whole side of the battlefield is supposed to represent the nebula. They can give you anything to represent that. I've seen some places use a piece of string across. You're actually supposed to use... It's supposed to be a foot in, which I think the range 3 is a foot, because I think each of these is 4 inches. So, like you can see, it definitely doesn't get my whole table on the camera, but you'd measure in from the side of the table on both sides, and then people use a piece of string or something to go across, just to represent the border of the nebula. And then you're basically going to set up on this end and that end of the table outside of the nebula here. This side is considered clear space. Ships that are in clear space pretty much function as normal. They cannot attack a ship that is in the nebula. They cannot get a target lock on the ship that is in the nebula. And they cannot use an action or ability that targets or is targeted by a ship that's on the other side there. So basically, it's 2 separate boards for the matter of the game. If you're in the nebula, this counts as 1. And if you're in clear space, that counts as 1. A lot of people I saw tried to just do a joust battle out here and keep the game without any of the special rules for the nebula. But if you do that, you're also costing yourself points because you get bonus points for things that happen inside the nebula. Now the nebula itself comes with all sorts of its own special rules. Once you get on this side of the board, they all take effect. First and foremost, you immediately disable any cloak once you cross that line, and you lose all of your active shields, and you do not get the ability to raise your shields at the end of the turn. So it really favors high hull ships that have low shields and don't cloak anyway, and you're going to get the most advantage out of those while you're over here. Once you're over here, you can't take a target lock, a scan, or a cloak action. However, there are ways around that. There's a lot of cards out there that let you place a token beside your ship. You're not technically taking the action. You were still getting the token, but you didn't take the action, which is kind of a way around that one. Also, our resource that we got for this event gives you battle station. You can take normal battle station actions on top of that. Interesting combos. Makes for a little bit different play style. As well, every ship that's in the nebula gains sensor echo as an action. They don't have to be cloaked to use this. The nebula itself kind of counts as your cloaking. The amount you can sensor echo depends on the speed you're going. If you're going speed 1, you can sensor echo with a speed 1, 2, or 3 straight template, which is huge. If you're going speed 2, you can use the speed 1 or 2 template, and if you're going speed 3, you can use the 1 template. It's a really nice feature, adds a lot more maneuverability to pretty much every ship that's inside that nebula, and makes a lot more options viable for the scenario as far as ships go. The next thing is any ships that are in the nebula also gain +2 defense dice, which is nice. Makes some of those high defense ships even harder to hit. You know, the little Riz bow there is rolling 5 dice without being cloaked, which is just sad. The ship itself isn't very offensive, but gives you an idea of the kind of things you're going to be looking at over here. And there's other things that boost up your defense as well. Tetrion Emissions is another one. It gives you a +4 defense dice. You're gaining +2 for the field, +4 for that, and your normal defense on top of that. Granted, it's only a one-use thing, but it's something interesting to keep in mind. While making attacks inside the nebula, everybody's limited to range 1. Now your primary weapon bonuses still apply at that range 1, which is nice, but it very favors things that already have limited range. Fighters that only have a limited range of 2 anyway aren't getting penalized that much by being reduced to range 1. In fact, you're gaining the bonus because you're only being able to fire when you're in close range. Things like the Borg, who had that limitation on their 360-degree arcs that pulled them back down to the range 2, now everybody's range is limited, so it kind of favors them ships, especially the Borg ones, because of their high hull values. They're also benefiting from that and the ability to regen. The secondary weapons are kind of an interesting, some changes with the Nebula as well. A lot of your secondary weapons have range limits that say range 2, range 3 limit any or only. And any of those type of weapons can still be fired in the Nebula. However, you have to fire them at range 1 because that's your limit to where you're attacked. And anything that has a limit of 2 to 3 is has a chance of damaging your ship as well because you're firing it at such close range. It's a pretty respectable amount of damage too. Basically, any damage you inflict with a secondary weapon that has a 2 or 3 in its range is going to deal damage to you equal to whatever amount you rolled minus 1. Although you don't take any critical hits from your own weapons, you just take normal hits in place of them. But still, it's a viable tactic, pretty fitting for the Wrath of Khan, and you just got to weigh the balance of damaging yourself in the process. And on top of that, any secondary weapon that requires a target lock in order to be fired, since you can't get a target lock while you're in the nebula, you can still fire them. However, the opponent gets +3 defense dice against that, on top of the +2 they're already getting for being in the nebula. And you have to discard that weapon when you fire it. So it's another one to keep in mind. Not so big of a deterrent for things that are already a discard when fired, but any of your disables or reusable weapons have to keep in mind that you're going to be losing those. So it really favors you to take secondary weapons that, instead of actually having an attack of their own, boost the attack of your primary or something like that. In which case, it's not the weapon actually doing the attack, it's boosting your primary attack so you don't have to discard it. That's a really big thing to keep in mind. There's lots of upgrades out there similar to that that'll boost up your attack values without being a weapon themselves. And those are the kind of things you're going to want to look at for this. And then the other dangerous thing about the nebula is collisions. Because you can't see very well, you run the risk of running into opponents, even when doing close maneuvers. So any ships that overlap during this event, you're going to back yourself up just like you would during a normal collision, put yourself down, and then that ship loses its action for the turn. It's specified specifically in the rules for the event that the ship loses its action for the turn, which has been a debate because large base ships like the Borg cubes and the Xindi weapon have a rule that says they don't lose their attack when they overlap another ship. So it's a back and forth. I want to lean towards the fact that anytime you run into another ship, you lose your action by the rules, except for those large base ships, which have an exception to that. The fact that the scenario rules specifically state that you lose your action when you bump, the only reason they would need to include that is if they were intending for that to also apply to those large ships. Otherwise, there's no reason to actually add that ruling since that's already in the core rules. Now, other people argue that the special rules for the large base ships trump the rules for the scenario, but as I said, there would be no reason for them to put that line in there unless it applied specifically to ships that it normally didn't apply to. So find out with whoever's running your event before you play how they're going to rule on that, but for now it's kind of still open for debate. So on top of the normal things for bumping that we just kind of covered, you also, each of the ships who bumped are going to roll a number of defense dice equal to half of their captain skill, rounded up, and you take 2 damage minus the number of evasive rolls. So you need to roll at least 2 evades or you're going to take some damage from the ram as well. And finally, whenever a ship is destroyed inside the nebula, the opposing ship, the one who killed it, gets a mission token. And those tokens are used at the end for the bonus points for figuring out how many ships were destroyed inside and outside the nebula. The game ends when one player's fleet has been wiped out or time runs out. At the end of the game, you score 5 additional points for each mission token that you have representing a ship that you destroyed in the nebula, as well as the player who has the most of those mission tokens gets an additional 10 points on top of that. So really rewards you for fighting in the nebula. The only real downside I see to this is I see a lot of people who get low on health trying to run outside the nebula. Not only can they not shoot you from there, which buys you an extra turn or two to maybe repair or regroup, but it also will deny them the bonus points for killing you in the nebula if they follow you out and blow you up on the outside. Not sure if that happened often. I haven't seen enough reports. I didn't get to play in this event myself, so just something that came to mind, especially if you have a way to repair yourself. If you hug this line, you can hop back and forth across it, and people on the opposite side of the line can't shoot you or target you or anything. So it gives you that chance to come in here, fire, duck back out, repair, come back in, fire, and whatnot. At least seemed like a viable strategy to me. Again, as I said earlier, the scenario favors ships with limited range, fighters, Borg. It favors non-maneuverable ships, anything that looks really nice but you don't want to run because it can't turn most of the time. You're getting those sensor echoes which let you pretty much hop wherever you need to be, which is very nice and helps in that respect. As well as ships with high hull and low shield values, which you would normally overlook. I saw a lot of people on the forums talking about taking the Xindi weapon ship, which with its sluggish maneuverability and no shields, really can take advantage of the nebula and becomes a maneuverable ship, and nobody over there has shields, so the lack of shields really doesn't hurt it at all. In fact, it's a bonus because you're not paying extra points for those shields that you're not going to be using anyway. So, interesting scenario. Still missing that we're no longer getting token things. In the very least, they could have printed up some small tokens to lay out here back to back across as a symbol of where the nebula was, just for reference in the game. Not something that would have cost them a lot, but it would have been nice for a visual representation of where that line was. Again, it comes down to them cutting components and cost for the scenario kits. But it is an interesting and fun scenario to play. I like that we have the different varieties in the scenarios, and hope they keep doing things like this. For the prize for winning this month's event, we got the USS Reliant. Now this is a different Reliant than the one that was available for retail purchase back in Wave 0. This one's actually, you can see there, it's an independent faction where the original one was a Federation expansion. So it's kind of interesting there. Again, it's another shipless prize ship. No base, no ship. But I'm doing a standalone video for that, so if you're interested in seeing more about that, check that one out. And that's pretty much it for the Month 1 Wrath of Khan event, and we'll see you in the next video.